creeps. Welcome back to the mortuary. I am your host, Morbid Tuna, and here is where we talk about horror films and related geekery. Today, for my second ever movie review, I'm going to be reviewing 2024's Alien Romulus. This is a film that has been hailed for its use of practical effects. And in the current age of CGI, that's kind of a big deal, at least to a certain lot of us who appreciate the ooey gooey messy side of the 1980s and early 90s mechanical monsters in the scenes at the time with the actors, rather than being added in later. It brings the atmospheric dread back into this franchise, which, if you talk to a lot of fans, they will probably tell you it's been missing for a pretty long time. Before I get into all the specifics and into the meat and swine of it, I will sum up in a very vague way by saying this film's greatest strength is also its greatest downfall. And now I shall elaborate. This film is such a love letter to the original, and I mean that in a kind way. It was really obviously crafted with a lot of care and attention to the canonical details that all us horror geeks are very, very big on. Don't mess with our canons. Don't mess with them. I warn you. The trouble is, though, it's such a love letter that it comes off as a bit too amateur, a bit too... I don't know if the horror film can be mushy toward its source material, but somehow it manages it. And I don't mean in a goopy, nasty mush kind of way. You know what I mean by mushy. The final effect of all that is, in some ways, it comes off a little bit like a student film with a great big budget. Anyways, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. I'm going to get into this a little bit at a time, kind of going through the film without giving too much away, and then tell you what gives me the impressions that I've been laying out in front of you just now like a bunch of fresh chopped corpses. So the film opens with this feel like you are in the universe of Weylan-Yutani, created originally, of course, by Ridley Scott and H.R. Giger, and then added to and expanded upon by James Cameron and all his team. You are in that universe right away. It's very clear because everything is grungy. There's this feel of this hopelessly struggling people living on this terraformed planet, and everything's wet and mushy. It's raining all the time. It's like, are we in Seven? And everything looks worn and battered. It's not sleek and polished like you see in the Star Trek universe, for example. There's no Federation here. Weylan-Yutani is here, and, well, anywhere that they are, misery and nastiness just seem to abound. Filth and disease, too. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, right off the bat, we are thrown into this very grim world. And that sets the tone for the whole film quite nicely. It starts to already deliver on the promise of the doom, gloom, depressing, nasty world where the monsters from other worlds are maybe not as bad as the ones from our own. Maybe. So, the story unfolds at a pretty steady, easy-to-follow pace. It is noticeably a quicker pace than the previous films to which it is largely alluding. It's written, obviously, for a modern audience. Let's keep in mind, the original Alien came out in 1979. It's a heck of a while back. And the first sequel, Aliens, came out in 1986, which is not exactly yesterday either. Times change, audiences change, expectations change. So while you do feel like you're in the Weylan-Yutani universe, this is definitely something new. Right away, it seems reassuringly familiar to the fans, but at the same time, something new. Something we haven't seen before. We see some bits of technology we haven't seen yet. We see certain levels of this company operating we haven't seen yet. Small things like that. We also see familiar things that are just stylized a little bit to let you know that this film is putting its own signature on it, but it's instantly recognizable. The ships, the monsters themselves, all that good stuff. Another vital trope of this universe is present, the android trope. Every Alien film, since the first one, there has to be an android character. It's just part of the recipe of the wonderful Xeno soup that we've all come to love. And of course, there is in this one, and they need to do something new with him, so right off the bat, fans are wondering, is he going to be a good guy android? Is he going to be a bad guy android? That trope checks that box. We've got the android, and I won't give it away. Neat things happen with him. Stuff I haven't seen in any other Alien film to this point. The actor who plays the android, by the way, is definitely one of the better ones on the crew. And he effectively has to play more than one character, more than one persona. I'll leave it at that for now. I mentioned before the real monsters, and that, of course, is the impossibly evil Weylan-Yutani Corporation. They're up to their usual callous standards. They're not disappointing us this time. Nope. Treating their employees like worse than cattle, all that stuff that we've seen in the previous films. People are all expendable assets to them. So the big evil corporation trope is there. Check that box. Next on the list of alien tropes, we have the strong female lead trope. The strong female lead trope, very important. You cannot be without one in the Alien universe because in the established universe, as everyone knows, in the first and second films, Ellen Ripley, played by the great Sigourney Weaver, is the get stuff done, defying the odds, surviving no matter what, screen heroine that we didn't even know we needed. Certainly not back in 1979, but boy, did she ever explode onto the scene. So, you need to have a strong female lead, and for the most part, I'll get into this a bit more later, but for the most part, box checked on this one. You're behind this girl, you want her to win, you want her to succeed, you're rooting for her in everything she does. So she is definitely an effective, strong leading female in that way. Like I say, check that box too. Next on the list of tropes, one of us horror fans' favorites, the body horror trope. There has to be body horror in the Alien universe. If you've seen even a few minutes of one, you know in crucial scenes it was established gross stuff has to happen. It has to. These are not just sci-fi because they're set in space or they're set in the future. They're not just sci-fi, they're sci-fi and horror mixed together. And there has to be scary things, there has to be disturbing things. Like I said, this ain't Star Trek. This ain't Star Trek. This is dark. It's dark and it's gross. And gross things happen to people because gross monsters do gross things to people. And it's horrifying and awesome at the same time. And, like I said, largely practical effects. It's gooey, it's tactile, it's in there, in the room with the actors. They're actually getting the spatter on their face. They're actually seeing the glorious birth of one of these monstrous beings and getting splattered with entrails and all that. There's no computer animation in there. The actor isn't pretending, they're actually getting messy, and it does make a difference. It does. Feel free to say in the comments if you disagree, but I think it does make a big difference, and a good one. I'm not saying that computer animation doesn't have its place. I'm not saying that. But when it comes to face-to-face encounters between the monsters and the good guys, I'll come down on the side of practical effects every time. And the ones in this film, I gotta say, well done. They ramp up the facehugger threat, just as an example of this, and all the facehuggers are puppets. Really nicely done, latex, plexiglass, whatnot puppets that are actually running along surfaces and actually making contact with the actors. You can see it, and it's just so refreshing. So refreshing in the CGI era to see that. I have to hand it to this film. The hype for that actually did live up to it. It did. But I digress. Next trope. Jump scares! Did he jump? There are always jump scares in the Alien universe. There are these claustrophobic, dark, threatening places where the monsters always are. There's always Xenos crawling in the dark somewhere that you can't see. And then, bang! Again, like established by the first two. They've got to come out of the dark at least a couple of times, and it's quite effective when they do in this one. Like I said, not just the adult Xenos either. The facehuggers play a much larger role in this one, which is also pretty cool, I have to say. That was quite neat and interesting to see. Previously, the facehuggers were always just kind of an extension of the threat of the adult Xenos themselves, but in this, the facehuggers are treated more like a threat in their own right, in tandem with the adult Xenos. Kind of a neat idea. I kind of like that. Next Alien Universe trope is technical problems, technical difficulties, tech failures, I call them. Something's got to get broken. Either it's not working already, or something shorts out, or something overloads, or something melts down, or the power, something happens and the tech gets fucked up. And all of a sudden, the stakes are raised. Something's more dangerous, something we don't have as much of this as we thought. There isn't as much of that anymore. We're not going to be able to do this in time for that. The tech craps out on us. The technology that in this future universe, everyone is clearly very dependent on, fails them. Just, of course, when you need it the most. It's like in a nightmare when the monsters have every advantage and somehow you feel like all your advantages don't exist. Something gets broken, something doesn't work, all of a sudden an escape route is cut off, this kind of thing. Tech failure box is checked and it only adds to all this cascade of horrible problems that these unfortunate space explorers, bandits, have to deal with, adding yet another threat. Because that's something we always get in these films is layers of threats. It's not just the monsters, it's not just the evil corporation, it's a whole bunch of stuff happening at once and it just gets worse and worse for everyone. And finally, I'm going to mention the emotional investment part. That's supposed to be in every Alien film. Some have done it better, some have done it not so well, but this one checks that box quite well. You're rooting for the characters, at least some of them. You really want them to succeed. You actually feel a little sad when some of them don't make it, this kind of thing. Now, basically, I've just given you a list of reasons why I think this film hits the mark. Now, though, is the part where I have to tell you the things that made it miss the mark. Because despite all the nice things I've said, there were several issues with this film that I had that make it fall short of being something in the class of the films that it's an homage to. So number one, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this film is such a love letter to the original that it becomes a bit of a parody of itself. It starts to get a little hokey. The resourcefulness of the characters begins to get a little cartoonish after a while. You begin to get a bit of a vague flavor, almost of like a crypto superhero film in certain moments where there's, we can do this and we'll put that together, and they have this ingenuity that just seems somehow out of step with the characters they have shown us up until then, who are mostly, they're very young, they're very determined, but they're clearly naive in some areas. They lack experience, they lack the self-control. Certain among them lack the self-control for sure, certain ones, more than I was really prepared to believe. Now, finally, the worst offender. In amongst all this lovely practical effects, like I said, there was some CGI, of course. There has to be some with the ships and stuff, but they CGI'd a character in from previous films, and it was so bad. Like, oh, dude, why? Why did you do that? It was this super ham-fisted, like, blot in the middle of this generally decent attempt at an Alien film. It was felt so much like pandering. There were times where there's pandering with the dialogue a little bit. Here's a line you were waiting for. Here's a line you're waiting for. Okay, well, I'll put up with a bit of that. But this shoehorning in this previous character, I don't really see why they had to have that character there. They could have had a different character serving the same function, but it just felt very, very forced. It damaged the feeling of this film being its own thing. It was kind of like they were adding something to their patchwork that was the wrong color or that was the wrong type of material, just stuck out. It just brings it down. It brings it down a lot, actually. That, plus some of the corniness I mentioned earlier, the hokiness of some of the downtrodden and the cheesy relationship building, which does make some of the characters more believable, but it also goes a little too far sometimes and gets a little bit too sweet for this savage universe. So, after having said all of that, would I tell someone to go see it? Yeah, I would. I would, because it's kind of refreshing to see an alien film like this that isn't just some two-dimensional rehash as we've seen ever since Alien 3. It doesn't come up to the first two, of course. Of course it doesn't. But it's worth seeing once. So, in sum, I would give this one 2.5 dead tunas out of 5. Alien Romulus. Go see it, stream it, enjoy it, but don't set the bar too high for it. Just have fun. That's all I have to say on that score. Any little spoilers that I want to put in there, I think I'll put them down there. So just don't read below. Don't read down there. If you don't want spoilers, don't look down that part. Okay? Just don't look there. If you look there and it gets spoiled for you, I don't want to hear about it. Okay? Of course, as always, click the like button, click subscribe, and tell all your horror-loving friends about this. Come check it out. Come to the mortuary. Come see this weird guy sitting here talking about horror movies. Anyways, I will see you creeps next time. This is Morbid Tuna saying good night from the mortuary and slash you later.